Association and also former chairman of the Granby Village Council. Mr. Crispin Gregoire, also no stranger to us here in Granby. He attended the Granby Boys School, the St. Mary's Academy, former teacher at the Granby Primary School. He served in many international roles, including ambassador of Dominica to the United Nations, and also served as chief for Caribbean region at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. Before I present Mr. Willie Fevrier to look at the before the uprising, I want to share a quote from Robert Heinlein. He says, "A generation that ignores history has no past and no future." Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yes,
Mr. Willie Fevrier.
Yes, Roots. Yes, Roots. Yes, Roots.
Thank you, John Roach. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
We'll give you the pass back.
Good evening, Paps. You're welcome. On Lotterco.
Okay. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm very happy. Yeah, I'm happy to see some distinguished people in the audience. Welcome, Father, Holday, and others. My role tonight is to look at what was Granby before the revolution. What did Granby look like? How was the feeling in Granby? Especially in the period, let's say about a decade and a half before 1974. That's what I'm going to look at. I have to acknowledge Mr. Michel Roberts' body because he has a very good memory about these old days. So I did liaise with him and got some of his input into my presentation. And I know he's listening, so good night, brother. What I've done, first of all, I will define the village of Granby at the time. And then I'm going to look at the economic and commercial and agricultural aspects of life in Granby from the late 1950s to 1974, approximately. Now look at health, education, culture, sports and recreation, and youth and attitudes, social behavior, etc. So in that order. The structure of Granby. Granby is a unique community. It stretches from the sea to the mountain and is positioned on a ridge with a long street we call the Lally, with houses on both sides, stretching, as I said, up to the hills, where we would include Hagley, Powell, and Wabinbana. Beikwa also, where the area just by Fresh around there, Beikwa. That was Granby before the revolution. You agree?
Yes,
No,
yes, Paps.
We didn't have space. That was Granby. Granby, c'était un anti-quake.
Granby was a ravine. by the community center.
So we are right. So we are bordered by the ravine coming down on the north and Ambasso on the south, and we are hemmed in there. That was Granby. Now let's look at the economic and commercial sectors. In other words, what did people do in that space? So I'm going to look at that. What did people do in that space? Well, first of all, the Geneva estate itself employed many of the people And then you had the Stowe estate. Some people went on to work on the Stowe estate. And also, there were some people in the Hagley area who had holdings on the Grand Colibri estate. It didn't operate as an estate at the time, but people were tenants on the estate. So these estates and lands provided some employment. Now, so it means that the amount of labor that was available in Granby, people had to go out and find employment elsewhere. So, some men and women, they went to the north and they worked on the Melville Hall estate and the Londonderry estate. And I'm telling you, you would remember when on a Friday fortnight they came back to Granby, there was a lot of activity. Rum flowing in the shops, money flowing. Some people also went to work on the Transinsular Road. And some of you might remember the song about Sute Norway, South Africa. So yes, Norway, because the place was so cold, I believe some people coined it Norway. But that was on the Transinsular Road. But the point I want to make is that already Granby was constrained so much that people had to go out and find employment. That's the point. Now, a lot of the ladies in Granby engaged in straw weaving, right? Making hats and mats, and supplied the nuns in Roseau, who exported some of that material. So it was a matter of self-employment. There were carpenters, there were a couple of shoemakers, there were a few tailors, seamstresses, there was a blacksmith. You remember Bassiani? Right? Making pots and pans. Yes. Yeah, tin, yeah. And people did their little gardening. And of course, there were several shops. So many people were just self-employed. The major shops in Granby, of course, was Mr. Azuz, right? A Syrian who established himself where Mr. Artis Ferrier is now, that was here, his big shop was. And he supplied a lot of stuff, from clothing to kerosene to gasoline, you name it and you could get it by Azuz. And of course, Postman came later. Then there was the fishing industry. There were a lot of fishermen in Granby, you know. Salpan is where they dock their boats, right? And I'm sure you remember some of them, Mr. Yorty and Mr. Grell and Bilo and Auni and Mr. Eugene, you know. All of these guys went into the channel on sailboat. They didn't have motorboat then. And I'm telling you, the first time I went across that channel to Martinique, what I saw, I said, well, how did these guys survive these big waves? I mean, the ferry itself was being tossed about. So they had to be very, very brave to be able to cross that channel and get the fish. Now, there were also government employees, of course. The teachers, the nurses, the police. And guess what? There was a sub-treasury in Granby at the time to provide government services to the people in Granby. Then came the banana boom. Around the mid-1960s, bananas started to become king. To the point where things were so good in Granby that Barclays Bank actually opened a branch in Granby. Did you know that? Some of us who are of certain age. Yes, yes, yes. Right on. And of course you had the rise of the credit union. And of course Mr. Nassif had his own shop on the estate. And you bet when he paid them, some of that money went back into his shop, okay? Because the people used to take a lot of credit from that shop. Yeah.
Do you know he was a thief?
Well, I am not going to that. No. Yeah,
That's true.
but in spite of all those services that were available in Granby at the time, yet it was still necessary to go to town, especially to get goods in bulk to supply the shops. So you had the big trucks, the 3-ton trucks, going into town off and on and bringing up the bags of flour, bags of sugar, bags of rice to supply the shops. But essentially, most things were available in Granby. Oh, I even forgot to mention the post office. We had post office, and we had many other things. Okay, so we will leave. Some people are getting into the office already. Obviously, all the skill that was available in Granby was always looking for opportunities to express themselves, to find employment and so forth. So what happened then in the 60s, there was a lot of migration. A lot of people started to leave Granby and went to England, right? In the 60s, late 1950s and 1960s, we went to they migrated also to St. Thomas. Young people especially went on to St. Thomas. And some went to Canada. So there was a brain drain, basically. There was a massive hemorrhage of the intellectual capacity of the village at that time. Okay, so we'll leave that section. We have to move on. In health, we had a cottage hospital, and by the way, there was a morgue, you know. Yes, there was a morgue in Granby. Yeah, at the back of the present youth center, and the hospital used to have beds to accommodate sick people. There was a resident doctor, right? And the government built a house in center for the doctor. And there was also a house for the magistrate. But we're on the health now, so we'll concentrate on health. There was a doctor, there was a resident nurse in the hospital, there was a dispenser, a pharmacist, and so when you went to the hospital, you got free service. The doctor was available, dispenser, nurse. Yes, that's where the youth center is located. Now, our first doctor was Dr. Philip Griffin, a Ghanaian, and he was his first stint when he returned from England to serve in Granby. There was a big reception for him at the Unity Club. There was a club of mature people led by Mr. Henkel Christian, who was the teacher, the head teacher at the primary school. And he organized various activities at the Unity Club. In fact, it was called the Unity Literary and Debating Club. And they used to debate against the Daubeny Club of Roseau. Okay. I have to make that point because people believe that there was not much educational activity outside of the schools, but there was in those days. In health, there was always a sanitary inspector going around to inspect people's homes for mosquitoes and so forth. And I don't know if you recall, there was also a spraying campaign, DDT, right? Why was that done? Because there were bed bugs all over the place, right? Pines, yes, insect pests, and so it was necessary to spray the homes. There was also a spell of various diseases such as measles, mumps, lagoon, yaws, pien, rash, and fevers. These were the things that were affecting the community. We didn't hear about hypertension and diabetes at the time. Okay? And why? Because our nutrition, right? In those days, exactly. Local food, local meat, local fish. And of course, at that time there was no electricity, so you had to salt it or dry it. That's correct. Okay. Under education, we had the Granby Boys' School and the Granby Girls' School. The girls' school was located in the churchyard because actually it is the Roman Catholic Church that started this girls' school. And if I go outside of the period that I'm talking about, the boys' school was also started by the Jesuit priests, you know. Yeah, and it was at the time when it started, earlier than the period. I just want to mention that. It was a co-ed school. My great-grandmother told me she went to school there. It was a co-ed school, boys and girls. But later on, the government took it over, and it was the Granby Boys' School. Then you had Teacher Leah, who ran the post office. She had a preschool. And Miss Adina in Hagley also ran a small preschool. There was one at Tetlari. Who was there? No, that was after. Listen, I'm taking it from before the revolution. Okay? Yes. Okay. The new Granby Primary School was opened in 1971. Okay? Yes, and it was a donation of the Canadian government. Yes, Pierre Trudeau was the Prime Minister, right? Now, funny, there's a little story about this, you know, because the government had asked Mr. Nassif for a piece of land to locate the school. And Mr. Nassif, I understand, Matela, but I understand, he said he's not selling, he's not giving, he wants an exchange of land. So he gave some land where the school is at Highland, and the government had to give him a piece of land at Center. All right. So, in essence, Granby had a reputation of having many highly educated people at that time. Yes. One man who stands out is a teacher he was a head teacher at the Granby Boys' School, Zephaniah Joseph. It was a little before our time, but I must mention him because he had a great impact on the intellectual capacity of many of the men. I mean, if you remember Wadi would tell you, "Sou parle l'école Zeph, ou pas avant." But Mr. Zephaniah Joseph made a very big impact on the community. There were many head teachers coming from Granby. So much so that they were deployed all over the island. Roberto Litham to the east, Kiva Henderson to the east, George to the east. Crispin's father, Mr. Gregoire, sent to Dublin. Kinat Litham sent to Calibishi. Teacher boy Henry sent to Pirisavan. So we had a plethora of well-trained head teachers And Granby couldn't take all of them, so they had to send them all over the island to teach. Okay. All right, let's move on to culture. One of the biggest cultural activities, of course, was, I wouldn't call it carnival, because at that time it wasn't carnival, it was masquerade. Yes, everybody wore a mask. Because the principle of masquerade at the time is that you should not know the revelers. Yeah? It was a sin for you to know who was that person behind that costume, behind the sensei, or the black devil, or the ladies in their masks. Right? And there were several bands, of course, and Van Lally, Van Bordeaux, Van Mortin, Van Dubic, Van Fonseca. And they all converged on Tuesday afternoon for the carnival in Granby. And I'm telling you, it was a spectacle, it was hot, but sometimes it turned violent. It was too hot, it turned violent. Because there was a rivalry. I mean, when you are jumping in this band with a mask, and the drums started to get into your belly, and you start to jump, and the two bands meet in Lally. You know, it's a clash of the bands, so sometimes it ended up in violence. And the song was Saki Piti Hale Koyo. Alright. Now, the other thing about Granby in those days, everybody wanted to learn to play an instrument. You know, all young men wanted to play a drum, a guitar, a trumpet, or something. People were very interested in music. And they formed bands, small bands. One of the first bands I can remember is one called DJ Brothers. And Rufus Bellot and Mr. Atin, Atanas played the bass. Cohen and Chubby's father, DJ, played the saxophone. Mr. Atok played the drums. That is Tobin's father, you know. They introduced the first instruments, like, you know, brass instruments in the community. And they used to practice at Maureen. We'll talk about Maureen later. And then came the Ebonites. The Ebonites were started by the Francis brothers, Milner, Psycho, and Alton, other fellows like Eddie Spur and Stephen, and the Warrington brothers, Harper and Osborne. So Ebonites was such a powerful band that they rivaled the swinging style of Rousseau. That's for sure. Now around Carnival time, there was a Calypso competition. And do you know that Chubby started as a Calypsonian? He started as a Calypsonian. There used to be a Queen competition. Tokyo, I believe, won a Calypso competition in Granby, and he became a famous Calypsonian. Yes, Dovila was the Carnival Queen in the 1960s. Now, while all this was happening, right here in this area, Matutu was teaching the young people who lived in this area to dance the ballet. Yeah? All the Hendersons learned it at the teacher Adi. And Mr. Raylan St. Louis taught the older people to dance the quadrille. Okay? Now don't forget, before the brass bands, I need to mention, it wasn't that there were no dances in Granby, you know. There was the accordion bands. Yeah? There were accordion bands, and people used to go to dance by Mapemba and other places. And then Orient took over to help young people to dance ballet and to beat the drum. Another big event, of course, was Isidore. And in those days, people used to come from all over Dominica to Isidore in Granby. Trucks loaded with people used to visit Granby. They used to organize excursions to come to Granby, and many of them used to sleep over. And guess what? Even Boxing Day was a big event in Granby. People came from other villages to enjoy Boxing Day. That's when you would get a big dance and you know, people had a lot of fun. So the perception of Granby at that time was that it was a safe place to go. People gravitated to Granby for the fete and so forth. Okay. Let's move on to sports and recreation and entertainment. The only sport that was played basically at that time, major sport, was cricket, and it was played at centre. Although before that, the cricket was played at Bordeaux, but then it moved to centre, and the ladies played rounders. And in the 70s, Granby was known to have two of the best fast bowlers in the island, Jerome Mello and Jerome Pierre. They played for Granby, they played for Dominica, they played for Windward Islands, and they played for the combined Windward and Leeward Islands. So they were just one step below getting to West Indies, right? And then we had a fellow called Benoit Stiot. That guy, if they had T20 cricket at the time, Mr. would be a star. He was a good wicketkeeper and an aggressive batsman from Hagley. Dominoes was always there. Almost every shop in Granby at that time had a domino table. Yes, right. And then introduction of basketball. Well, that is a story by itself. But just let's say for now, basketball was introduced, and it started down by the church, in the churchyard. Right? And it was the group YCW who started. They built, and the priest built a hoop. As a matter of fact, it was built mainly for volleyball, you know. But then, when the priest built the hoop, people started to play basketball there. And all the young men gravitated to the churchyard to play basketball. And you know the history of basketball in Granby. Granby produced some of the top basketballers in the island. And we were the first out of Rosal community to have a basketball team competing at the St. Mary's Academy in Rosal. Then Maureen was the center of entertainment. Maureen was first of all a theater. We played cinema there and dances and so forth. Then we had Hewlett's Hall. It was also an area for playing movies and dances. And then later Fredo's emerged at Mabouché and the cave and so forth. So there were places to go. The community hall, very good Tioska, and country garden. You know, so there were places of entertainment. Okay. All right. So let's move on. Youth and general Granby attitudes and so on. I want to mention that because I think the youth played had a significant role to play in those days. In terms of organizing the community. We had the youth group, the Young Christian Workers, right? And the Young Christian Workers was a national organization. And then you also have the Social League. The Young Christian Workers, they met every year to have a big convention, and in 1967, the National Convention was held in Granby. And you know, young people from all over the island were here, and they were entertained. There were lectures and speeches, there was a church service, of course. And of course, at the end of the day, you go to dance, South Party. Right, with the Ebonites and so forth. Then you had the Boy Scouts and the Girl Guides. Okay, so young people, boys and girls, had some organization to gravitate to. And of course, there was the library. There was a library in Lally. And on a Sunday afternoon, the young people would sit there and read the grandma, right? And have discussions. And the late Honorable Pierre Charles also organized groups like Lechelle and Pilier and those kind of groups there. And what happened with those kind of groups then, especially with the influence of people like Rosie Douglas, who used to come up to Granby and speak to the guys and the young people, and Bernard Wilshire, there was an awareness. There was an awareness among young people. And they used to discuss things like land reform. And don't forget, in the early 70s, you had the Black Power movement, which influenced a lot of the thinking of the young people. So there was a thirst for knowledge. And there was a degree of awareness in the community that was building. So Granby was a lively place. It was very vibrant. And I suppose with this kind of awareness, it just created the platform for what was to come later with the uprising. Because some of the things that were being discussed was land reform. Okay? And people took those things in and realized, well, boy, we can't continue to remain on this quake, on this ridge, you know. And so I think Crispin will take it from there, but this is my contribution for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fivry, and a round of applause for Mr. Fivry.
There are certain things I forgot, so God, we will talk about it later.
Yes. So that is preparing us for the uprising. Mr. Patrick Hill was supposed to look at the section that says dissatisfaction which led to the uprising, UNICEF coming from the Fountain Valley uprising in Seneca in 1972, and the role played by the community during the uprising. So I'm sure Crispin will cover Patrick's section, and then he'll take us into the first 10 years after the uprising. So I'll pass on now to Mr. Crispin Gregoire.
Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I first of all want to say good night, Mr. Chairman. It's a great honor to be a panelist in tonight's forum on Philip Francis, also known as UNICEF's Revolution. I first of all want to welcome all of the people who are here tonight. I want to, at the outset, recognize the children of Philip Francis, UNICEF. That's Gemma, Deborah, and Johnny. I believe all of them, the three of them are here tonight. I think I spoke to Deborah earlier and Gemma last night. And I want to say good night to some people here. I can't call everybody, but there's some people I must mention their names so that the public knows you're present. This is school time. Father Branca John, our parish priest. Paul Alexander of Wassin Dominique from St. Thomas. We have a retired U.S. Army officer, Leo Kazimi, here. We have a number of English and U.S. and other immigrants who are visiting Granby at this time, present here. And I also want to recognize our local historian, Brother Harry and Henry, also known as man-child number 2. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I decided to make a visit here, UNICEF was not yet deceased. And of course, UNICEF has been like a brother to me, and those of you who know my long relationship with UNICEF. That goes back to about 1961. In fact, UNICEF and I were so close that when my father was a civil servant, he bought a car, and the person who actually took care of it was UNICEF. So he was always at our home. And then when I went to St. Thomas as a student, when I was at the St. Mary's Academy in 1972, I went to St. Thomas, spent the summer there, and UNICEF was one of my running buddies that I hung out on the weekends. And after the revolution, I remained close to UNICEF, along with Eddie Adams, who was also in St. Thomas. Ladies and gentlemen, we are carried live, so I want you to keep your voices as low as possible. And I want to quickly give you some perspective of Geneva under the Lockharts. Because, you know, the Lockhart family, they bought Geneva estate in 1820. And they sold Geneva in 1949. So that means a period of 129 years that the Lockharts were here as slave masters. Master was institutionalized at Geneva under the Lockharts. After the Lockharts sold the plantation in December of 1949, first thing that Mr. Nassif did when he came to issue eviction notices to 200 on the estate. Before I get into Nassif, I wanted to have there slavery at Geneva. In 1820, we have data to tell you how many enslaved Africans were at Geneva from 1820 to when slavery ended in 1858. To give you a sense, in 1820 there were 253. In 1823, reaching to 279. In 1826, 300 Africans. In 1829, data for before the emancipation ends. 282. Significant about these numbers actually have been breakdown by males and females. And what it tells me, for every one of those years that they mentioned, and there are more women than men, 282, there are more women than men. The other thing that is mentioned that on the 23rd of January, 1836, that is the date that the Lockharts got the compensation for the slaves that they had. So those 300 slaves I mentioned, well, in 1832 there were 282 slaves. I prefer to use the word enslaved Africans rather than slaves. Huh? And that is, not the Lockharts got 5,646 and 4 shillings and 9 pence for the slaves on Geneva. That is how much money they got. 5 million pounds, 646 shillings. Right? No. 5,646,000, sorry, and 4 shillings and 9 pence. That's how much he got. But Lockhart didn't get a penny. Do you know why? He owed creditors. And as soon as the court announced his award, creditors jumped on him and he didn't get a penny. Creditors seized that money. But the Lockharts, so that's in 1836, but they go on for almost another 100 years at Geneva. And there was a lot of brutality at Geneva. They executed slaves who rebelled, were executed at Geneva. That place is a place with a lot of blood. And then in 1949, the Lockharts decided to sell. The last Lockhart, his name was Norman. He's the one who sold the estate to Nassif. 1,400 acres of land. By then, Geneva had grown to 1,400 acres. And do you know how much Nassif paid for that estate? Can anybody guess? £1,000. That's what Nassif paid for Geneva. And here is the price per acre. 16 pounds, 13 shillings, and 4 pence per acre. And multiply that by 1,400, and that gives you the 25,000 pounds that he got. So that was in December of 1949, he paid the Lockharts. And then, in December of 1950, 1 year later, he gives notice to the Grand Bay tenants on Geneva to quit his land, or else he will have them arrested, or he will break your house if you have a house on his land. And that's exactly what he did. And that is why the Grand Bay people were so upset about him. But I quickly hasten to add, ladies and gentlemen, that, you know, the Nassif family took it very hard that they lost their 1,400 acres. But the one thing I would have liked to tell the Nassif family then, if I was in a position to advise them, is that buying that estate from the Lockharts, they bought what I call a poison chalice. That place had so much history of repression and brutality that the Grand Bay people, after 129 years, were angry, very angry. And there comes the next master, and what he does makes things even worse. He pours kerosene on the fire that started to burn under the Lockharts. And he evicts 300 families from Geneva. And what is interesting about that, this is discussed in the British Parliament. This is discussed in the British Parliament, and questions are asked by members of Parliament as to why the Foreign Office would allow the eviction of the formerly enslaved Africans on Geneva Estate. That the Foreign Office basically said that they were making arrangements to resettle the Grand Bay people. And here comes the proposal of the Dominican Trade Union to the government, and that is, why don't you buy 600 acres of that 1,400 acres to resettle the Grand Bay people? And the British government agreed to that. And they set out to put in processes to make that happen. But then the planters on Dominica got worried that if that happens on Geneva, who will be next? So they go back to the administrator, the governor, the UK governor, and said, you know, administrator, we don't think it's a good idea that you buy 600 acres for the Grand Bay people, because if you do that, all the other estates are going to press. And listen to them, they agree with that. It's how to change the policy and get the Foreign Office to think that they're drawing their plan to resettle the Grand Bay. I must say that the hero in the crowd then was Emmanuel O'Black, a Grand Bay man, who was the leader of the Dominican Trade Union. And he was leading the charge for the Grand Bay people to get that 600 acres. Ably assisted by the late physician Alfred. She was the one writing most of the communication. And if you see the letters that were writing various places in Europe, socialist society of the UK. All of these communities were supporting the Grand Beach. It did not materialize, but the hope and dream of Emmanuel Loflat was of that was realized. The dream of Loflat was made possible by none other than Philip Francis Unison. For that, the Grammy people have determined that UNICEF is a national hero. He's a national hero. The most significant figures in Jamaica history in the second half of the 20th century. Interestingly, UNICEF was born at a very interesting time. He was born in 1950. And he died first quarter of the 21st century. So he saw 50 years of the 8th century and 25 years of the 6th century. And so he was able to what he was able to achieve. I mean, what he did for the American people. So he changed Dominica. Most people don't realize that, but only post-slavery to bring an end to the plantocracy. And that's what he did in Granby. And that is what he must go down in the history of Dominica as a giant, a hero in the world. And when he said, 1974, Sefla Kila, Sefla Kila, Sefla VAC. That was, for those of you who don't speak Creole, Sefla is he's in charge. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I witnessed that revolution. We always say, and we study revolutions, but to witness one revolution where nobody died, to witness a revolution where the entire community is involved, to witness a revolution where we tame the police, to witness a revolution where the police get so friendly with the people that they even end up having girlfriends in Grand Bay, and maybe they left some babies back here, right? I've never seen that in my whole life. So, we get to 74, and the revolution is on the way. It starts. If there's a starting point of the revolution was Carnival 1974. The Roseau Police High Command, they decide they go into Granby for Carnival. I thought they were coming to just look at Carnival and make sure no trouble and whatever. They came to fight. And that's the worst thing you can do to come to Granby on Carnival Day and try to fight the Granby people. You asking for trouble. And what I witnessed, ladies and gentlemen, was police running away for their lives, rocks and bottles on them, and they were taught a lesson on that day. And then what followed next was UNICEF arriving from prison, and the revolution just took a life of its own. I wanted to put a little structure to this in the sense of what is the things that really was the reasoning for the people uprising. Well, of course, for many years, the parliamentary representative for Granby at the time, the late Honorable Stanley Fedel, he had been raising with the government of Dominica of Premier Edward Lee Bland that Granby people needed land. And the Premier was very, very understanding of that. But the question is,
would Nassif sell any of his land to the Granby people? Of course, Nassif had no interest in selling land to Granby people. So it means that, and Willie gave a brilliant description of what Lale was like before the revolution. Granby was literally this little strip of land between two ravines. That was what Granby was. And Mr. LeBlanc said that they want to buy land, and I think at one time they were thinking of buying the 2 estates at Grand Colibri to risk 4 Granby people, but it never happened. And then the movement for New Dominica, it's very important to mention their role. What was called the Black Power movement, it transformed into the movement for New Dominica. And then the movement for New Dominica had always promoted an agenda of land reform, of breaking up the estates from the colonial era to a post-independence Dominica where these plantations that reminded us of slavery would no longer be there. And we were pushing that. And I must say that Granby was one of the fertile bases of the movement for New Dominica. And yours truly was the focal point for the movement for New Dominica in Granby. We traveled around the country talking about ending the plantocracy around the country. But frankly, we didn't have a clear idea of how difficult that would be, and that we could actually end up all in jail over time because of what we were promoting. And then all of a sudden, this Granby man who had been to the Virgin Islands in 1968 comes back home and starts a revolution, and he's not a political figure by any means. He's just a radical, how would I say, a no-nonsense fellow. And when he says, Nukale Fesa, that's what we're going to do. But the interesting thing about UNICEF, he never really gave that many instructions. The people took it on for themselves. Here I was teaching at the Granby School, and these 9-year-old boys that I was teaching, and girls as well, these boys were cutting coconut trees. And coconut trees were starting to fall almost 24 hours at one point. And then the entire route from Granby to Pichelin was blocked with coconut trees. There's no way the police could ever get to Granby. And the worst thing that the government did, they really didn't have a choice, but they closed the school and let the school be where the defense force and the police are based. So that means that these 600 to 800 students who are at the school, they are on the street, and they are participating in the revolution. And that is really what made the revolution succeed, because it was a bottom-up process, right? A bottom-up process. So the main issue was land. And land has always been the issue between the enslaved Africans and the massa and the planters, going back to the first plantation, which is Geneva Estate. So the people who were enslaved were fighting for their freedom, and they were also fighting for land where they would settle. Because don't forget, these people were captured in Africa and brought to a strange place they don't even know. And now they are fighting for their freedom. And what is also important before the Nazis is that in 1844, there's the census riots. And it's important for Dominicans to understand the census riots, because the census riots, a lot of things happened in the census riots that repeated itself in 1974. Number one, Granby was the center of the census riots at Geneva. That is 6 years after the emancipation. And the planters were threatening the former slaves that they will be re-enslaved, and the reason why they were doing a census was to find out who was present and who they were going to re-enslave. And the former slaves said, "Pala, that's not going to happen." And they started to riot, and they said they will not deal with any enumerators. They are not going to give their names to any census poll takers. And that's what they did. And do you know that that protest spread from Granby to Corleone in one day? That tells you the network of informers that the ex-slaves had, the entire west coast of Dominica, and rioting went on. And how did the British government respond? They declared martial law, and they killed people. They hung the leader of the census riots from Point Michel. In public in Point Michel, they hung him. And at Geneva, you know what happened at Geneva? 2 people. They cut their necks, cut their heads, and put their heads on poles to warn people, don't try that anytime again. And the skulls remained there until the birds had plucked up all the meat, and the skulls remained there for weeks. And that was mentioned in the British Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to say that where we were before the revolution, the need for land was paramount. The second thing is that Granby people are unyielding. I hasten to say that I know that there are a lot of Nigerian Igbo people here in Granby, and Igbos don't take things for granted. They will fight to the last man. That is the Igbo culture, and Granby has significant Igbo culture. But Granby also has other tribes, elements of other tribes. There's another tribe called the Ibibios of Nigeria and Cameroon. Some of the people that were brought here are Ibibios. And of course, you know, the people from Bordeaux, we have a strong Congo Basin representation in Bordeaux. So, the Granby people have always been fighting for their survival. That started with the Jesuits, the first Maroons, Bala and Congore. They ran from the plantation, and they set up a network to challenge Massa in Granby. Now, I wanted to say some things from what Patrick Hill would have covered before I get into the main points I want to make about my presentation. Patrick mentioned UNICEF coming from Virgin Islands. And one of the things that was, you know, many people looked at UNICEF as though he was somebody they couldn't understand. But UNICEF was an incredibly intelligent man. He was unassuming. Imagine, UNICEF was influenced by Malcolm X. UNICEF was influenced by Martin Luther King Jr. UNICEF was influenced by Angela Davis, who was a major figure in the Black Power movement in the US in the 1960s. UNICEF was influenced by Jimi Hendrix, the guitar player. That's why he wanted to be a guitarist and became a guitarist. He loved Jimi Hendrix music. And so there was an event in St. Croix in 1972 when a group of St. Croix men attacked a golf course. And their rationale was that they were very concerned about mainland Americans taking control of St. Croix. And they didn't like that. And there were some murders. And that affected UNICEF, I must say. That was something that really touched him. And the other thing about UNICEF was that his grandmother was one of the victims of people who were evicted from Highland, from Geneva. And he vowed, I never knew this until close friends told me, he vowed that one day he would settle that score with Nassif. So from the time he was born in 1950, the very year Nassif was starting the evictions. And I'm sure by the time he's 5 years old, he's pretty clear what has happened to his grandmother. And it is his grandmother who raised him, pretty much. So he had that score that he wanted to settle with Elias Nassif. And the other thing is that, you know, the community is amazing. Granbarians are one of the most rebellious set of Dominicans I have seen. In my, you know, I'll be 70 years this year and I have seen quite a bit. And Granby people, they have an arrogance about them. I'm a Granby person, so I can get away by saying that. Granby people have an arrogance about them, and that is, nobody is going to trample on them. Never. That's not in their DNA. That is why the slogan developed after the revolution. Gwambe Mosoti. When you say that, when you say Gwambe Mosoti, that means Granby I come from. You are making a statement. Respect me. Respect me, this woman from Granby. Respect me, this man from Granby. That is the brand of the Granby people. And it's a brand that is on your chest. And you can go to Roseau and you can exclaim that. And imagine the audacity of Granby people. In the 1960s, the only other place outside Roseau to have gang was Granby. And Granby youth would go to Roseau to fight howlings in the market, you know, and then hop on the truck and go back to Granby after they have done their feet in Roseau. So that tells you the kind of thing. And then, you know, when I went to the academy, there were like 3 sets of students who speak patois during recess. One group from Granby, one group from Point Michel, one group from St. Joseph, one group from Maho. These 4 places, patois only during recess. And Granby people leading the charge. No wonder, in the cultural revolution that happened with Creole, Granby people naturally lead the charge. Okay? So that's one of the things that Patrick wanted to underscore. And that during the revolution, men, women, and children were involved. I remember the police going to search many homes, and they would just be surrounded by the Granby people. And I was nervous that the police was going to kill people because they were so scared. And they were really scared until UNICEF was captured. Oh, well, not captured, but until UNICEF gave up himself because he was being haunted for days. And it's just a stroke of luck that he was not killed because there was plan to shoot him at sight. Now I want to now speak a little bit about what happened after the revolution, the first 10 years. And I'm going to try to do this quickly because I know you have a lot of questions to ask. And that is, this happened at a very unique time in our history. That is, Premier Edward Oliver LeBlanc had decided to resign and leave political power. Something totally unprecedented. The only other person who has done that is Mary Eugenia Charles. And they had this problem of Geneva, and the government decided that they would side with the Granby people. And in that way, they would purchase the estate, and they would, in effect, do a land reform. But before they could do that, the government collapsed after independence. But everything had already been put in place for the land reform, and the then Minister of Agriculture was Oliver Serafin, who became the interim government prime minister. And they started the process, and they brought in some experts from the University of the West Indies, led by a professor called Dr. P.I. Gomes. And they came up with a plan for what to do with Geneva. It wasn't a very easy endeavor because Geneva was complicated. And now we have to find a solution. So the government, they took over Geneva, paid Mr. Nassif $1 million, and then they set out to a plan for distributing the land. But it was the government of Mary Eugenia Charles that completed the land reform and the distribution of the land. And immediately after the takeover of Geneva, you have a kind of a social explosion in Granby with a number of youth groups emerging. First one being Lechelle, led by a group of mostly teachers, and that included in that were people like Pierre Charles and the late Noreen John and Frances Del Sol and Errol Zavi, just to remember a few of the people. I was one of the people involved as well, one of the founders. And then, once that group was established, the next group to be established was PLA, which Paul Alexander of Wasin Dominic today was one of the founders of that group. And then there were other groups. There was one group called FUSH, one group called SWORD, I think that was a women's organization, and another group called SLD, Sovereign Liberated Dancers, led by the John brothers, John Baptist John and his brother Sonson, right. And the government of Eugenia Charles invited the OAS to come in to finalize the plan for the land reform, and the person that was the point person for that was a man called Paul Brown, a Jamaican national. He was married to a Dominican woman, Shumaine Green Brown, and then both of them are deceased now, and Paul Brown directed the whole implementation of the land reform. As soon as the few years after, 74, we have Hurricane David. And Hurricane David really was a major setback for Geneva because it destroyed most of the coconuts that was still left. And it destroyed whatever infrastructure was left on the estate. And it changed the direction we were thinking that Geneva could take. And then we lost a lot of our people who migrated out of the devastation of Hurricane David. During that time, we had, in that first 10 years, the growth of the banana industry, because now Nassif is no longer in the equation, so Granby people can now grow bananas to sell. That was one of the areas of contention. Mr. Nassif did not want the Granby farmers to grow bananas to compete with him. He wants them to work as workers, but not planting bananas to compete with him. So that was a no-no. what happened next with the land reform, it meant that Granby people, or the majority of Granby people now get titles for their land at Geneva. And that puts them in a very strong position with the banks, because now they have collateral. They can go to the bank and get a loan. Of course, I should mention that migration continued unabated. It just grew and grew. So we're talking about 1974 to 1984. In that decade, a lot of people migrated because of Hurricane David to new places, to Guadeloupe, large numbers, to St. Martin, large numbers, BVI, St. Thomas, St. Croix, and St. John. Heavy migration to Canada, to the US, to England. Migration continues. Huckstering grew. Granby always had some women who were self-employed, and marketing in Guadeloupe. We always had that going back to the 1940s. And post-hurricane, that grew. And then a new industry emerged during the revolution. Marijuana. Marijuana became the new crop, the new banana crop. I remember during the revolution, Granby was a marijuana center. And a lot of the Roseau dreads who were pushed out of Roseau came to Granby to find a peaceful place where they could be welcome. And of course, one of the things that drew them to Granby was the fact that they could smoke without having to worry about a police officer coming to tell them you are under arrest. And I want to mention two last things about Granby in that first 10 years. One, the emergence of the Midnight Grovers as the undisputable leaders and pioneers of calypso music. And they have done that for the last 50 years. And, of course, the other cultural entities, Tradi Bell, whoever else. But you, the Granby people, you know all of the icons of that era, that first 10 years after Geneva, right? And I just want to say the other important thing that happened in that 10 years was the re-emergence of the Granby Credit Union. You know, Granby, in the 60s, we had tried the credit union, and it did not work. It failed. But we tried again. And today, Granby has a thriving financial institution. And thanks to the immigrants abroad, they have invested quite a bit of their savings in that credit union, making it an institution, a multi-million-dollar institution. And I think that that institution has great possibilities going forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm going to stop here. I've given you a good snapshot of what happened in the first 10 years. Oh, there's one thing I forgot to mention. Let me just say that, Mr. Chairman. And that is, when I left Dominica in 1975 to go to university in the US, it was always my intention to come back. I did not go to the US to stay. I did come back. And when I came back in 1984, I came back very lucky. I get a job as the director of Save the Children. I come back to Dominica. I'm working with the Kalinago people in the north, Marigot and Wesley. And then I go to the Prime Minister and I say, Prime Minister Mary Eugenie Charles, Granby has supported the Freedom Party in opposition and in government. Can you help Granby by allowing Save the Children to open a program there? And she said, by all means, Mr. Gregoire, go on and do that for us. And within 2 months, I raised $500,000 US to start the program in Granby. And then that was in 1984. But in 1985, something happened. The late Pierre Charles gets elected for the first time in Granby. And the Prime Minister calls me to a cabinet meeting and say, Crispin Gregoire, I don't want you working in Granby proper. You just want to help Pierre Charles, but I'm not going to let you do that. So I said, well, Madam Prime Minister, can I work in Petit Savan? And they said, oh yeah, of course. Of course, we still control Petit Savan, so you can go there. So I went to Petit Savan, and you know what happened? 5 years later, the Freedom Party loses Petit Savan. And that same year, in the 5 political districts I'm working, they lost all 5. So, before they lose the 5, they close Save the Children. They tell me they don't want me to do any more community work. Pack up. The Prime Minister says to me, give relief to children. Now, I had some good projects for Granby. That $500,000 US to start. Many other donors came to my table and said they want to put money, they want to invest in Granby too. And in no time, I already have a commitment of $1.5 million US to start. And if you think I'm not telling the truth, Willie Fevrier, who was my teacher at the Granby Boys School, I recruited him after he came back from Bermuda to run the Granby program. And that did not happen. So I just wanted to put that in there to say that we, the Granby people, we were thinking about what we do with Geneva. And there was a lot of hope that the Save the Children program could have contributed to the Granby community. Yeah. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this is what I would like to just say, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I wish we had the police here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to open the floor for questions, and we will also accommodate comments, constructive comments. I'll tell you straight off, anybody that starts with anything negative there, I will pull the mic from you. Okay? So our first person is Paul Alexander, and then Michael, and this nothing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roach, and good night to everyone. Now, to piggyback on Mr. Willie Fevrier, when he spoke about everything that happened in Granby before Geneva Revolution and up to the Geneva Revolution, I just want to add that, as we all know and heard throughout the nights we have been here, that colonization started in Granby. And then that's where the first white man came to start a colony, was in Granby. Now, Geneva Uprising happened. Granby became a conscious community where Crispin mentioned the youth groups were formed like Glacial, Pilier, Push Forward, and so forth. Now, seeing that Granby people are very conscious, especially the youth, the intellectuals who came from the United States or wherever, England or wherever, they found that Granby is the place to go and start to sow the education and the consciousness about revolution and revolutionary and leftists and socialism and so forth. So the first one who came was Bernard Wilshire. He made his base in Granby and was working with us, educating us on struggle and revolution and socialism. Now, I want you to understand that when Rosie Douglas was deported from Canada, there was a Dread Act law in Dominica, and the Dread Act law said, anyone you think of as being a dread, anybody could just shoot that person and go to the police station and say, I shot a dread, and you are free. Nothing going to happen to you. So when they were trying to deport Rosie Douglas to Dominica, he told his lawyers in Canada, he was fighting this deportation. He said, I cannot go to Dominica. If you deport me to Dominica, I will be labeled as a dread and nobody can kill me. So the Canadian government called Patrick John and said, well, for us to deport Rosie Douglas, that Dread Act law, you must suspend it. So Patrick John had to suspend the law, and Rosie Douglas was deported to Dominica. But he landed in Barbados first, and when he landed there, some, journalists, they told him what, we heard that Patrick John said, you are coming to Dominica to join the struggle. And if it's that you are going to do, Patrick John said, he will pity you. He said, well, if Patrick John said that, I don't believe the Prime Minister of a country does not know what struggle means. The struggle I'm going to Dominica to join is the struggle to push Dominica for independence. And when Rosie Douglas arrived in Dominica, the first place he came to was Granby. He made his base in Granby and started educating us that the struggle is not to overthrow Patrick John, but the struggle is to seek independence for Dominica. So we are going to work with Patrick John to bring independence to Dominica. Now, if it was not for Granby, Dominica would not get independence in 1978. Independence would come at a later time. Because when Rosie Douglas went to Patrick John and said, well, Patrick, you know, it's time to get Dominica independence from England, because independence is the first step for development. Patrick John said, that's not the guy that said I was coming to join the struggle to fight against me. No, I have a friend. And Rosie organized Granby. That was the place, because that was where revolution was in the mind of the people. There was a lot of consciousness. So he found, well, that's the place to start the independence struggle. And Granby mobilized with Rosie Douglas until the British High Commission had to come to Dominica to find out if people really wanted independence. And Rosie Douglas brought about 500 to 600 people from Granby with t-shirts saying, independence yes, independence now. And we went under the ministry. And when the man came to the ministry, when he was passing to go upstairs to talk about the independence, when Dominica was ready for independence, when he saw the crowd, he waved at the crowd. When he reached upstairs, he told, at that time it was, he told Patrick John, but I see the people are ready. See so many people that say independence, yes. So why Rosie Douglas had to do that? The Freedom Party at that time was fighting against independence. They were saying Dominicans are not ready for independence, and we want a referendum. We want to go and ask Dominicans if they want to be independent. And Rosie Douglas said no. Independence, yes. Referendum, no. And we were printing that on t-shirts. And then we said independence, no. And all the independence brigades, Granby was always in the lead. And SLD, the Sovereign Liberation Dancers, Bolde and Sons, they made a song. What's the song again? Fall, England, fall. Fall, England, fall. Right. We don't see you in the way independence bound to come through. And we used to go all over Dominica and promote that. And because of that, the referendum for Eugenia Charles failed, and Dominica became independent in 1978 because of Granby people. So Granby has always been in the lead for anything. So you have to give yourself a round of applause for being a Grandarian. And as you know, we had a president from Granby, we had a prime minister from Granby, we had an ambassador from Granby, the first doctor, Dr. Griffin from Granby, and Granby has been in the forefront of a lot of things. So the President Liverpool, yeah. So because of that, we are proud to be here today, because the consciousness that came into our head came from UNICEF. When we saw how we can take over an estate and make it belong to the Granby people. So tonight we are celebrating UNICEF, and tomorrow, big funeral, we want everybody to be there. And as I said last night, I have a lot of brooches. Everybody going to the funeral will have to wear a brooch, a badge, and also have the books you asked for, titled The Granby Geneva Revolution from Bala to UNICEF. Well, it was started by Bala and ended by UNICEF, and the book is available. I have some tonight, and before you leave, you can get your badge to wear on your shirt tomorrow while attending the funeral. So we would like you to be there. We want everybody to be there. We want it to be a very big celebration, very big funeral. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawa. Michael Anderson, thank you very much.
Yes, Sister Rose.
Come, Michael. Emo wants
Who
you.
was the first to publish the book on UNICEF?
Okay, Maria.
To behave on himself.
Good evening, everybody. I just have a few questions. Just for Mr. Gregor, for your presentation, briefly you had mentioned that when UNICEF came back, you said prison. I'm not sure if he had come back from prison or if he had come back from the Virgin Islands. Right, he mentioned prison, so I was a little bit confused. So I was just asking if that was he came back from the Virgin Islands. Okay, and do you have Mr. Richard?
Okay, he was arrested.
Okay.
He was arrested. What happened was that after he arrived from St. Thomas, he went by Nassif and he took a bottle of wine and didn't pay for it and was arrested, and that's why he spent that weekend of Carnival in prison. And at Stockholm.
Okay, thank you for that. And just if you can provide us with a bit of insight as to how exactly he started the actual revolution. Did he, what were the actions that he took that inspired the rest of the people to follow?
All right. I actually have I did a 12-minute. We are, don't forget we are live on radio, so it's important that we pay attention that right. Now the question that you asked Ms. Henderson is that I'm sorry that the distraction is a little I want the listening public to understand that we have some people who are making some noise in the background that's causing some. I think we have it under control. And that is going back to your question. I now. Okay, how did it start? Okay, so he comes from the court. He's charged $100, which he pays, and he goes to Granby. And according to Ashley Xavier, who I did an interview with, and I actually have the video, we will show that in time. Ashley says that UNICEF saw the truck of Nassif, flagged it down and told the driver to hand it over. And the driver hands over the keys to UNICEF. And UNICEF takes the truck, he and Ashley, and they take off. And they see some guards, Geneva guards, and who have guns. So UNICEF call them and say, gun. The guard, I know he's gone to UNICEF. And the one holding on fast and they go. As he says, went up to the house. And he said that he was there with some friend watching TV. You know, in Granby you could pick up the signal from Barbados television. And so we always watch cricket in Granby. Ashley said that he went into the house while Nassif is watching TV with his friends. And Nassif was aware that somebody was in the house, so he fired shots. That's how that was like the first day. And then that same night, Miguel, they killed the bull. So it was like one bull was slaughtered. That bull was cooked on that same night. Imagine there were many homes where meat was cooking. Alright. No provision, just meat. Of course, that time, people like me ate meat. But because of the dread influence, I stopped eating meat, and most of us were not eating meat after the revolution. But during the revolution, we were eating meat. We were eating beef. Then the next thing that happened, more cows were slaughtered. You know, this thing went on for about 5 weeks. Yeah. And then the crowning event was when they burnt the Geneva house. And that same night, the store in Rosa was burned. And you know, there's been a lot of discussion about whether there were outside people involved with the Granby people. The answer to that is yes. And there are people here who can attest to that. There were Roseau Dreads who link up with the Granby Dreads. And when they burnt Geneva, and when they burnt the store in Roseau, there was very much. Yeah. So when these fires happen, the next thing the government does is declare state of emergency in Granby. And then they deploy the defense force and police to Granby. And Granby is now under state of emergency. And the police have a free hand and the defense force. That time we had both the defense force and the police. The thing is that all that time they're looking for UNICEF. But UNICEF is right there. He's hiding in the ravine by Madelso. That's where he is all the time. And he knows, and every time the police move, his informers tell him where they're moving. When they go to search homes, the Grammy people just descend. And, you know, the police officers and the defense force, they were very scared. Because they just don't know what to expect. Of course, they knew that the Granby guys had weapons. Not only did they have the weapons that they had asked people to give them, I remember there was this one guy, I won't mention his name, he's known for carrying a bag of guns on his back. And then there's another man who was the coordinator of all the weaponry that was going. There were weapons. And there were things like Molotov cocktails. Like a bullseye. You do make a bullseye, you put kerosene in it, you throw it in a building, it will burn. So these are some of the things that was happening. And it was when the state of emergency was declared by Mr. Leblanc that the attempt to take Granby back and bring order was what was in place. And the rest is just a phenomenal story. Yes.
Thank you. Hold it. Yes.
Thank you. Since the topic tonight is the impact, the social and economic impact of the uprising on Granby, I would like to direct this to Willie Favory. Could you make a comparison pre-uprising and post-uprising?
Yeah, certainly. Well, first of all, the land issue. And it is significant. While we said that the Hurricane David was a bad thing for Granby, but actually there was something good in it, you know. Because Hurricane David actually exposed the Geneva estate. And houses were broken, so young people picked up the pieces and settled on Highland. That's where they started. And today, as a matter of fact, a surveyor once met me and told me, "Boy, you know, I came to Highland, man. And the kind of houses I see, they're $1 million houses. And these people have not paid for their land, you know." Yeah. So that was one of the things. The impact was that it created land for the people. I mean, we were being choked on this ridge, right? So it was like an oxygen, you know, that restored the life of Granby. And I think the fact that Hurricane David came at that time, just after the revolution, it just was the impetus for people to move out. And now there are several communities around Granby. Housing spread. The other impact.
No documentary on UNICEF.
The other impact.
Put that project together.
Of course. Was land available for institutions, right? Like the new hospital, new police station, right? And the high school, exactly. The playing field, right? And that's a story by itself, the development of that playing field, you know? So, briefly, you could see the social impact was improvement in sanitation, improvement in housing, and improvement in various institutions. And remember I said at one point, Granby was basically self-sufficient. We had magistrate, we had doctor, we had hospital, we had schools, you name it, post office, sub-treasury, bank, credit union. So that is starting to return. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. February. Yes, Ariane. Come to the mic, because remember we are live, so.
A question to Mr. Willie February. What was Henkel's Christian involvement in Granby? Henkel Christian.
Yes, Mr. Christian was the head teacher at the Granby Boys School, and at the time they had the Unity Club, and he mobilized the people in sort of adult education. And also he was instrumental in getting certain people to learn music, right? So they had a debating society. The Unity Club had the debating society, and they used to debate against the Dobini Club of Roseau. So he had a great impact on the young people to get them organized and so forth. Now he was the Minister of Education at the time the new school was opened, right? As a matter of fact, when I was about to go to university, Mr. Christian called me to his office and told me, you know what, we need a secondary school in Granby. And he asked me whether I would be interested in developing a program when I returned from university. I was, of course. And indeed, I was the principal of the Granby Primary School, but then the hurricane came and I was transferred. Does that answer your question, sir?
Okay, in the interest of time, we only have 5 more minutes because of the live coverage. We have to end at 10. We want to spend the remaining time we have looking at the way forward. The way forward for Granby. The reputation of the community, the way forward for Granby. How do we maximize on the gains made from the uprising and the need for a better relationship between Granby and the Nazis? So I'll pass on to Mr. February first and then to Mr. Gregor.
Well, going forward, I believe that in Granby we need certain structures, especially among young people. Just as in the days when we had the Girl Guides, the Scouts, the YCW, various groups, I think we need somehow to, and by the way, there were groups in the church as well, the YFM, Young, CYM, that's correct, CYM, Christian Youth Movement, right. So I think we need those kinds to get the young people involved. Basically, That's one of the things I believe that we need. There are too many distractions in the community, and people are not brought together to discuss issues as it used to be in the days of the youth groups like Pili and Elisha and so forth, and YSW. Because I'll tell you something. Grand Bay has always been a community where people could do things for themselves in those days. Right? Nobody had to start Ebonites. The young people got together and started Ebonites. When we started the basketball court, you know how that started? It started with the YCW having a workshop. And we were put in various groups. Those from Grand Bay in a group, and we were asked the question, what is a major concern? Think about it, come up with it, and let us drop. And you know, I was part of that group even.
I think Willie has really honed in on this. Well, I would say that there are two things I would like to see happen with Geneva. You know, it's a generation already, 50 years of that of UNICEF revolution. And a lot of the people who benefited from getting land for agriculture, many of them are deceased. Many of them passed on their land to their children. And many of these children are overseas. So it means that a lot of that 1,400 acres of land that is available to the Granby people is not under production. And of course, it's a reflection of the larger problem in the country. Our country is not producing. Once bananas collapsed, our agricultural output plummeted. And it's been a struggle for us as a country to get back our level of production where we can export. I think that Granby has a few.
Agricultural production is concerned, I certainly think there is room for an organized marijuana industry, because we have a lot of people in Granby who have some of the best skills in growing marijuana. Of course, years ago you couldn't say that, but today I would say that most of these people who have been growing marijuana as for income have great skills, and I would like to see them have greenhouses going forward so they can be producers for export and for a medical marijuana industry. That's one. The second thing is that livestock and other crops like cassava, for example, we need to return to such crops. And I keep advocating for the whole of Dominica that cassava is an important crop that we must bring back in our food security. The last thing I want to say is this. I believe that with the passing of our great hero, UNICEF, we have reached a point where we need to take stock. And one of the things we need to take stock is that we need to find a way to improve the relationship between the Nassif family and the Granby people. This time, the Granby people are standing tall on the same pedestal like the Nassifs. The Granby people got what they fought for, what they wanted. It's unfortunate that it happened to be the Nassif family that faced that, but as I have always maintained, whichever family had bought that land from the Lockhart would have faced trouble. That poison chalice of Geneva, they would have had to face it. Now I want to say that the Nassif family naturally would have been, they were angry that they lost their land. That is history. But now we want to find a way to be speaking in a cordial way with the Nassif family. And I noticed something that happened last year or the year before when the new Fort Young was opened. That the performing cultural event was by a Granby Tradibel. And that spoke volumes to me. What it said to me is that the Nassif family have finally ready to make amends with the Granby people. And I think that they need to be applauded for that. And I am going to take the responsibility to convey to the Nassif family that we, the Granby people, we had an issue with them. That issue came to resolve. They got paid for their estate. It wasn't like we just took their estate and they didn't get compensated for their land. They did get compensated. And now we want to open a new chapter. And we welcome the Nassif family hiring Granby people in their hotels, in their business. And even after the Granby people had kicked them out from Geneva, they still continued to hire some Granby people at Belfast. And so, all is not lost. I think that we need to make an amend, an olive branch, rapprochement going forward. And I think, I feel very confident that the Nassif family will accept our initiative to work together for the best interest of Granby and the Nassif family. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I have Senator Patrick Hill on now. He wants to make a recommendation the way forward. So we're going to try to see if we can get him on here. Hold on. Go ahead, Tricky.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we hear you.
Johnny, you can hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So thank you very much, Johnny and Crispin and Willie, for all of the information that you have shared tonight. My hospital bed. Unfortunately, I could not make it tonight. I wanted very much to be there, but life is what it is. But here is what I would like to say about the way forward. I remember growing up in Granby during the time of the revolution and the time of UNICEF. And what I remember of this community is that it was a community of very courageous people. It was a community that was not afraid of the power structure in the country. It was not afraid of the power, of the political power structure. It was not afraid of the economic power structure. It was not afraid of the educational power structure. It was a community that was courageous and that was grounded on the sacrifice of enslaved Africans and the sacrifice of indigenous people, the Kalinago people. And so I believe that the way forward is for this generation that we are in today, this generation that is enjoying the economic and social benefits of the Geneva Uprising that UNICEF led. The people who are benefiting economically, who have gotten lands, who are building million-dollar homes, who are starting businesses, who are operating a credit union that is vibrant and economically viable. That all of these things, we must not forget where it came from and how it materialized. And we should honor the sacrifice of the people who contributed to this uprising, to UNICEF and Dogan and all the rest of the guys. And this generation must not forget the courage that has brought us to the point that where we are. I feel to some extent that we have become complacent, that we have forgotten what it is to struggle, what it is to sacrifice, what it is to stand up to authority and to stand up for what is right and to be able to speak truth to power. That is something that the Granby community has always been known for. And I am afraid, I feel in my bones as though we are forgetting that sacrifice and we are forgetting that struggle. And I just want to say to the people who are listening, let us not forget the sacrifice that UNICEF and his band of brothers, the sacrifice that they made to bring Granby to where it is today from a little strip of two little strips of land surrounded by ravines to a sprawling village that is full of beautiful homes and grand palaces. And that we must continue the struggle and continue to want what is right for Granby and by extension what is right for Dominicans on the whole. That we must continue the struggle and not give it up. That's what I would like to say and emphasize tonight.
Thank you very much, Ricky. I really appreciate that. And trust me, I can imagine the kind of pain that Patrick Hill is in, because and he's one of the persons who really, I'll tell you straight. UNICEF was going to be buried like a nobody, and it took the committee and people like Patrick Hill and Paul Alexander Lauer to intervene, and people like, you see John Baptist John Olde, he's the one who initiated that whole thing. People like Cole and a few others to intervene and say, no, that man cannot be buried like that. Branca John can tell you, Father Branca John can tell you, when I call him and he sent me a WhatsApp mail to tell me, no, he's going to be buried Friday or 2-3 weeks ago. I couldn't believe it. I almost cried, But I know what that man means to us. I'm not saying meant, because whatever he did lives on. And we decide that it's not just going to be about his burial. We want to make sure that man's legacy lives on. That man did not want anything from anybody. And we are going to make sure his 3 children, Deborah, Gemma, and Johnny, we're going to make sure that they reap the benefit of his sacrifice. And that is what that committee is about. And those people who think that what we are doing is political, let me send news to you tonight.
stop that nonsense they're doing and dividing Granby people. And the way forward for Granby people, unless we come together to stop that nonsense political thing that dividing, destroying us in Granby, we will never make any way forward in Granby. And I want us to end here tonight because of live coverage. Thank you very much for tuning out. And Michael, you want to say? Oh yes, Mr. February can tell you. Yeah.
I was about to make that comment, you know. Two little comments I want to make. I taught UNICEF in Standard 3 at the Granby Boys School. He was a very helpful guy. And obviously he lived close to the school. And in those days, the organization United Nations International Children Emergency Fund, UNICEF, supplied powdered milk to the schools because they felt that they wanted to boost the nutritional status of the children. UNICEF was always at school very early, and so the teachers would ask him to help to mix the powdered milk with the water. And he used to drink a lot of it too. And so that's how he got, people started to call him UNICEF. Right, that's how he got his name. Another thing I want to say about UNICEF, while I taught him, it's a little story. Once, while I was at the board writing, a big boy in the class threw a stone at me. Were you in that class, Crispin? Yeah. UNICEF and a few other guys, and the guy, after throwing the stone, he ran up to Island. UNICEF took a couple of the guys and ran after him, arrested him, and brought him back to the class. That showed his bravery, and that showed also his sense of justice, because he had not done anything that warranted a student for himself. So I noticed these characteristics of UNICEF. He was brave. You listen to him talking about his peers. He always had a sense of balance and justice in his talk. One last thing I want to say, and I'll shut up after that, is that we talk about going forward and how we can take advantage of. The development of the Geneva playing field is a perfect example of how Granby people just decide to take things into their own hands. That's how it started, you know. A few of us got together and we said, right, look, we need another place to play. Center was not enough. There were young boys, talented fellas like John Fabian's boys, fellas like Frida, Roach himself, young cricketer, Swinburne, Ansem and so forth, very good cricketers. And of course the adult cricketers like Psycho, Lambert, Boniface Xavier and so forth. We formed a team called the Berricans. And we used to go up to center to practice. And we couldn't get a chance to practice because the fellas from Hagley used to take over. So it started in John Fabian's living room. Archie, Boniface Xavier, John Fabian and myself. And we were brainstorming and we said, but wait, here's this piece of land down there. Let's go there. There were concerns about the river. We went down there that Sunday afternoon and we said, boy, that's a perfect place for a playing field. And we spread the word around. The fellas from Bubble City one Saturday afternoon started to cut down trees. And people just came, drink jelly, cook food and so forth. And within a weekend, the place was almost clear. That is how, and of course, we had, well, it's a long story. I mean, Newton is here, he was at the Lotto at the time, and Lotto given, John was there, and it was a matter of the community taking charge without consulting government. As a matter of fact, right, and yes, Lambert Henderson Cricket League and so on. But it's after we took over, then I was asked to go to the government and speak to them and tell them what we were doing. Unfortunately, Mr. Rupert Sarendo was the minister, right? And he taught me at SMA. So we had a good rapport. When I told him that what we were doing, he told me, Willie, go ahead, man, go ahead. But there were people in Granby who were opposed to it. And they reported to Eugene Charles. But Rupert Sorindo told me, go ahead, Willie. That's all right. You will need a playing field? Go ahead. I'll give you a blessing. And the other thing is that Henry George was the Minister of Community Development. And he was my friend. So they all supported us. We got support from the entire community. You know, if I have to speak, it will take me a lot of time. But all I can say is that it was a whole community effort, right? Milner Francis, Walter Desabey provided funding for us to do certain things. And I can't say that the government didn't help. They did help. They sent Caterpillar to level the place and so forth. And I have to mention Stanley Pemberton. Stanley Pemberton is in England now. He used to go down there while the Caterpillar was working. He pushed them and pushed them and pushed them until we have this beautiful playing field. And by the way, those of you interested in cricket, there will be the Under-19 Windward Islands tournament being played right there this weekend, starting on Saturday.
Thank you, Mr. Grace. So I just want to end by giving some Jerry, you want to make a statement, Jerry? You know why, Jerry? You have to say something, Jerry. Jerry was UNICEF's caretaker for the last 10 years, so I will let him say something. But I just want to give you all an update tomorrow's funeral. The procession will start at 12 noon up Tetlally, Tongdilali, Bayfront, and to the Geneva playing field. The viewing will be from 1 to 2:30. The funeral ceremony will start at 2:30. There will be Mr. Crispin Gregg. There will be several tributes. We will have the exhortation by Father Jack Liffam from the Granby and Pishley Gospel Mission. The homily, the main celebrant will be Father Branca John, and who will also be responsible for the interment at the Geneva site where he will be laid to rest. At what I am calling tonight, which we hope will become the Philip Francis Memorial Park. That is where he will be laid to rest. Following the funeral, we will come back to life and the burial. The eats and drinks will be here by Collier, and the big stage will be by Bubble City, where Midnight Groovers, Lobster, John Fontaine. Stilleman just confirmed that he'll make a 7 Sakis, Unity, New Look will be also that New Look and Sakis will be accompanying the body down during the procession. The dress code is white top and jeans, and I think Lawa is going to distribute the pins tonight. But the President of Dominica did indicate her interest to be at tomorrow's funeral. We have not gotten confirmation from the Prime Minister. We also expecting both the PAREP for Pidit-7 and PAREP for Granby constituencies to be at the funeral, among other dignitaries. Okay, so at this time I will call on Jeremiah Moransi to come and make some remarks. I mean, Jerry is the person who has been there for Buddha in the last 10 years, and we just want to thank Jerry for what he's been doing, for what he did for Buddha before he passed away. Come on, Jerry.
Yes, good night everyone. I've been listening to the program for the longest while. I came down here because I heard certain things.
Be quiet.
I heard certain things, I was very pleased of, but I heard certain things that I want to clarify before we go further. I just before we end that UNICEF was going to bury like nobody. I want to clarify certain things. I'm very outspoken. I'm a very outspoken person. I like things to be clear. The reason why UNICEF was going to be buried like this, I was going to bury UNICEF like this. The reason why, I was the only person burying UNICEF. I was in public so we could hear what's happening. It took me 18 days. It took me 18 days to get a phone call from Patrick Hill. 18 days after his death to get a call from Lawa and Sisi to know how he was going to be buried. That's the reason why he was going to be buried as soon as he get the autopsy. I was the only person spending to bury UNICEF. I want to be clear on this. I'm not expecting nothing from UNICEF. UNICEF is the man who fought for Granby. Granby should be there to bury UNICEF. I should not be spending for UNICEF. Or what I was done for UNICEF before, I did it myself. That's the reason why I was going to bury UNICEF as soon as we get the autopsy. Just to be clear on certain points, I like being clear. And I want it to be clear before we go further. I was the only person on that time now. The committee and the village council come to me and we had a talk about it. And we decide now to bury UNICEF. As I told them, if there's people participating in UNICEF funeral, he can stay for 2 years. Because UNICEF doesn't belong to me. He belongs to us. He fought for us. He sacrificed his wife and his child for a few months for us. Listen to me carefully. This man sacrificed his life, his wife, and his young daughter a few months to fight for Granby, expecting nothing in return. So if we have to give him something, we all should be there for him. And that's the reason why I was about to bury him in just a few days. Let us be clear on this. On that. He wasn't going to bury it just like that. Because I was the only person spending on UNICEF funeral. I hope we are clear on this. So we're going to be looking at this way. And that's the reason why Johnny Roach and the others decided we're going to work together to bury UNICEF. I came just to clarify that. Okay?
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, so you've heard from Jerry that it is the people from Granby who are burying UNICEF. So we are asking that we have a lot of bills to pay. So please, in whatever way, please make your contribution to the Granby Village Council so that we can cover all the expenses associated with UNICEF's burial. Good night and thank you very much.
On behalf of Emma News, we want to say thank you for joining and have a pleasant evening.